New York wasn't the first place where the stock market started. It didn't start in London either. And here is something that most people get wrong. It was never meant to help regular people slowly build up their savings. Most people outside of Europe have never heard of the European port city where it all started. There was only one reason it existed: to keep global trade from falling apart under its own impossible weight. Welcome to a place where money, power, and history all come together, and where things are never as simple as they seem. We need to look at what the world was like before Antwerp existed before we get into it. Stock exchanges don't just appear in systems that are already working. They come when the old ways of doing things stop working completely. Trade was very personal for most of the Middle Ages. A merchant would pay for his own trip, work with a small group of people he trusted, and take all the risks by himself. He would lose everything if his ship sank. He lost all his money if there was a war. Risk was all in one place, moved slowly, and was very cruel. This system worked well when trade was small and local. It completely fell apart when the second trade went global. Europe was having a problem it had never had before in the late 1400s and early 1500s. Trade routes now crossed whole oceans. It could take months or even years for shipments to come back. Prices changed all the time. There would be effects all over the world if there was political chaos in one place. No single merchant, and to be honest, not even most governments, could handle this level of risk anymore. Medieval finance couldn't keep up with the growth of global trade. This is when Antwerp comes into the picture. Not as a great empire, but as something much more important: a crossroads for money. Antwerp was right at the crossroads of important trade routes that linked the Mediterranean, the Atlantic world, and Northern Europe. It didn't rule through land ownership or military might. It was in charge because it had liquidity, which means it could quickly turn things into cash. Merchants from all over Europe went there because it was one of the few places where you could get goods, credit, insurance, and important information all in one place. The best modern comparison for Americans isn't a big city. It's more like a financial center, a place that does run the world politically but sets all the prices for it. As trade picked up speed, something small but completely new began to happen. Merchants stopped only thinking about owning ships or cargo. Instead, they started to focus on claims. Claims on shipments, claims about future profits, claims about results that hadn't even happened yet. It became more important to have paper documents than real things. This is the idea that changes everything. Merchants learned how to spread risk across many different people instead of putting all their money on one trip. They could sell their claim early to someone else instead of waiting years for a ship to come back. They could turn their uncertainty into something that could be traded instead of being stuck in it. Shares were around before Antwerp, so they didn't come up with the idea. It came up with continuous secondary trading, which is a permanent marketplace where claims could be bought and sold at any time for prices that everyone could see. This is where modern markets began. For the first time, wealth became something that could be moved around and was not tied to a specific place. You didn't have to know the ship's captain personally. You didn't have to look at the cargo in person. You didn't even have to think that the trip would go well. You just had to believe that someone else would buy that claim from you later. That change makes everything different. Prices start to move on their own once claims can be traded. The news starts to matter. People start to care about rumors. Timing is very important. Those who are closest to the information have a huge edge. Risk doesn't go away. It just changes places. This is a very important time to break a common myth. It wasn't a democratic idea to create the first stock exchange. It wasn't made so that regular people could put their money into it. It was a way for merchants and governments to stay alive when they were getting too big to handle. It let the rich take on less risk, get quick cash, and pay for huge growth without having to deal with all the problems that came with it. Markets didn't make trade safer. They made it possible for people who had access to it to live. The Antwerp Exchange quickly became a way to put a price on things that were uncertain. Wars, trade blockades, shipwrecks, and political chaos were no longer just disasters. They became things that could change, and you can trade variables. This brought in a lot of money, but it also drew in people who were looking to make money. As trading got more intense, Prices began to show what people thought would happen instead of what was really happening. Merchants who never touched goods were making money just by moving paper around. People who knew how information moved had a big edge over those who didn't. The system gave rewards for working quickly, having insider information, and doing things on a large scale. And this is where the first problems start to show up. Innovation in finance always comes before stability in politics. The Antwerp exchange did well in a world that was getting more chaotic, not more stable. Trade was completely unpredictable because of religious wars, empires fighting each other, and political alliances that changed all the time. And that uncertainty actually helped the market. But it also made the whole system very weak. Wars that messed up trade routes and changes in political power made Antwerp's power start to fade. The money moved somewhere else. Capital chased after stability. The exchange didn't fail because the idea was bad. It failed because money can't stay above politics forever. This is an important lesson that still holds true today. Antwerp didn't fail. It was copied. Once the idea of continuous trading showed that it could work, it spread like wildfire. Markets, like money, moved to places where they can work with fewer rules and more safety. Antwerp had solved the technical issue of liquidity. It didn't know how to solve the political problem. In the late 1500s, Europe was falling apart because of wars over religion, conflicts between empires, and alliances that kept changing. Trade thrived on abstraction, but there were still markets in real countries. Countries, on the other hand, can bleed and die. Antwerp's position became less stable as the conflict got worse. Blockades stopped the flow of goods. Troops marched through. People kept getting political power. Liquidity, which is more about trust than location, began to move to other places. Not because Antwerp's system was broken, but because it worked too well to stay in such a weak spot. This is the first hard lesson of modern finance. Markets don't stick to places. They are loyal to stability. Capital followed that line of thought all the way to Amsterdam. The Dutch Republic didn't just copy Antwerp's model. They made it better. Antwerp was the first city to come up with the idea of trading, but Amsterdam made it a full-fledged institution. The laws were clearer and stronger. There was better enforcement of property rights. Instead of trying to control everything, the government worked with business. And most importantly, finance was able to work independently in a way that earlier empires had never allowed. This is where markets stop being just places for merchants to do business and start being engines that run whole governments. Amsterdam's exchange was no longer just a place to trade claims. It became the base of an empire. The Dutch East India Company could get huge amounts of money, not because it promised success, but because it was easy to get money. Investors didn't care if the trips were successful. They just needed someone else to buy their shares. That small change changed how people act in a big way. Risk changed from being physical to being mental. You could get out of losing trades before they happened. You could lock in your gains right away without waiting for reality to catch up. The market rewarded people who were ready, not those who were patient. And speculation, which used to be just a side effect, became a real strategy. This is where the first bubbles start to form. Not because people were being unreasonable, but because the system made hope something you could trade. Prices began to show what people thought would happen. Confidence grew on itself. The value of paper money grew faster than the actual trade. And when reality finally hit, the results were terrible. This wasn't a failure of the markets. It was the markets working exactly as they should have. Financial systems that are made to deal with uncertainty don't get rid of it. They make it bigger, move it around, and make it take longer to pay. When corrections did come, they didn't come in a straight line. When London takes over in the 1600s and 1700s, this way of thinking is fully formed and mature. Markets are no longer just solutions for one area. They are now part of the global infrastructure. The stock market is now inextricably linked to building empires, financing wars, and expanding industries. Governments take out huge loans. Companies grow a lot. People buy, sell, and spread risk. And the gap between cause and effect keeps getting bigger. This is the part that feels too familiar today. The basic building blocks of modern markets are still the same ones that Antwerp used hundreds of years ago. Abstractness, liquidity, constant pricing, and the option to leave instead of being responsible. They are very good at quickly moving large amounts of money. They are not as good at making sure that the people who benefit are the same ones who pay the price when things go wrong. This pattern has happened in every major financial crisis since then. New financial tools promise safety and flexibility. Liquidity grows a lot. Risk moves away from people you can see or recognize. Prices stop being connected to real fundamentals. And when the system finally comes back to reality, the damage isn't spread out evenly. This isn't me passing moral judgment. It's an observation about architecture. The stock market was never meant to make things fair or equal. It was made to keep very complicated systems running even when they were under a lot of stress. And it does a great job of doing that for the whole system. People, on the other hand, have very different experiences depending on where they are. Antwerp's real legacy isn't a building or even a city. It's a whole new way of thinking about money, the idea that you can price, trade, and manage uncertainty, even though you can never get rid of it completely. That belief is what drives all of modern finance today. But it also makes us blind to the system's limits, since some risks can't just be turned into numbers on a page. They slowly build up outside of balance sheets and financial reports until the market has no choice but to pay attention to them. And when that time comes, liquidity goes away faster than it ever did. This is why it's so important to know where markets really came from. If you think that stock exchanges were made to help regular people get rich over time, you'll be shocked by how they act during times of trouble. If you know that they were made to help powerful people survive chaos and change, you can better guess how they will act. Antwerp doesn't leave us with a cynical or pessimistic lesson. It makes things clearer. Markets are tools, and they are very strong tools. But they aren't neutral, and they aren't moral either. They show what the people and systems that made them care about. They value speed over patience, the ability to leave over taking responsibility, and abstraction over real understanding. And once you really see that, you stop thinking of markets as protectors or guardians, and start treating them like what they've always been, ways to handle risk in a world that is always changing and not always predictable. History doesn't always repeat itself, but financial architecture stays the same. If this changed the way you think about things, make sure to subscribe. I'll show you exactly where to find the answers you're looking for in history.